So I woke up at like 4 this morning.
Oh, yeah.
Ish, right? And I couldn't really sleep. So I was like, I didn't want to have like an anxiety dream or anything because I've been a little anxious. And I wanted to see, because sometimes if I fall asleep thinking about something, I will dream about it.
Oh, I do that 100%. Yeah.
We definitely have that control. So I decided to go to sleep thinking about Slender Man
Oh, no.
to see if I would have a Slender Man dream.
Oh.
It didn't work.
I sometimes, especially because we were playing the game the other day, often when I've played a new game for the first time and it's kind of like something I'm not familiar with at all, and I play for at least a couple of hours, I usually do dream about it that night. And I think it's just because it takes the brain power to like learn a new skill. So your brain is like, oh, let's review our notes for the day, shall we? But I'm really thankful I did not have nightmares or dreams about Slender Man.
I'm surprised that I didn't.
I'm surprised I didn't also, because I think we both have pretty vivid imaginations.
Yeah, and let me know, like, I actively tried. So the fact that it didn't work, and I don't even know why, I was just like, things are making me anxious. What else can I think about? Let's think about Slender Man. We'll see where this goes, just to test my own mind. And then it didn't work, and I'm like, I don't know what I expected to happen.
Maybe your subconscious was like, Dina, today is not the day. You are not the one.
Bitch, I'm gonna go to sleep.
Yeah, I'm going to protect you this time. You get one chance.
Thanks, brain.
Anyway, speaking of Slender Man, we are still on the topic.
Let's start the show, shall we?
Shall we? Hello, everyone. I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
And of course, we did mention it very briefly there in the beginning. We want to thank everyone that came to hang out with us as we played Slender Man over on Twitch. That was our very, very first live stream. And I had a blast. It was a lot of fun.
I loved we got the suggestion for one of us to do the keyboard and the other one to do the mouse. And it was great. We made a good team.
You know what? At least the controls were fairly simple.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of a run and point and click adventure, more or less. But there was some very stressful moments.
I was stressed. It was very stressful.
Oh, my God.
And if you missed out on the stream, do not fret. We're going to be live again soon, twitch.tv/thegrimcurriculum. It's going to be a regular thing, and we had a blast. So if there's a game you want us to play or you want us to do something, let us know.
Yeah, and highly suggest going and giving us a follow, because we'd really like to make affiliate sometime in the near future. Hopefully by Halloween, I think, is a doable goal. So we need to have at least 50 followers for that. I know we can achieve that.
We're halfway there.
We are.
Yeah, we're almost halfway there. We hit 24 yesterday, so keep the love coming, friends.
Yes, please. Okay, so last week we talked about the entity known as Slender Man, a tall, well-dressed, sometimes tentacled figure known for luring children away, never to be seen or heard from again.
There's no doubt that there are many out there who still, to this day, have a fascination with him. Some fear Slender Man, while others are happy to confess their sexual fantasies about him.
We have definitely acknowledged that he is clearly a fictional character. There is no doubt about that. However, in today's episode, we will be exploring how fiction became reality when two 12-year-old girls lured their best friend into a forest and attempted to murder her.
And the reason they did it for Slender Man.
Our episode last week was definitely a little spooky, but certainly one of our more lighthearted ones. Today's episode will not be, so set your expectations. This is a truly shocking story, especially considering the fact that those involved were children.
I had to remind myself of this several times.
Yes.
Because you think back to when you were 12 and what you were doing and just the level of innocence. I was playing Neopets, I was playing RuneScape, I was hanging out with my friends, and I was having sleepovers with my friends.
Same, yeah, 100%.
Right? Like, it's such a normal thing. So to look at where this story went and just keep remembering this entire time while you're listening to this. 12 years old.
There will definitely be parts of this story, I think, that will kind of, if you do forget the age of the people involved here, that will kind of drag you back into reality very quickly, because they are preteen girls and they do act like preteen girls.
Oh, very, very much so.
So luckily, the victim in today's episode survived despite her horrific wounds, and by all accounts, nowadays seems to be living a happy life. We are happy to say.
Very much so. Today's story takes us to Waukesha, Wisconsin. It was May 30th, 2014. Payton Leutner, Morgan Geyser, and Anissa Weier did what plenty of other 12-year-old girls do. They had a sleepover. The girls were celebrating Morgan's birthday and got together at her house.
Payton had actually approached Morgan and became her friend because she felt that the girl was often alone. It was clear that she was having trouble connecting to the other kids, and the two became inseparable. They'd spend all day at school and then would either call each other or chat online the second they got home.
Anissa was a new student at the school and connected with Morgan. Payton wasn't as close with her as she was with Morgan, but they would sometimes have lunch together. About Anissa, Payton would later say,
I just hung out with her because I knew that Morgan really loved her as a friend, but she was always cruel to me. I feel like she was jealous that Morgan was friends with me and her.
That evening was a typical Friday night. The girls went roller skating and had a blast together. What Payton didn't know is that for weeks leading up to the sleepover, her friends were plotting behind her back.
She truly had no clue that anything was wrong. She brought her American Girl doll with her and was eager to spend the night watching movies and hanging out with her friends. Her mom described her as being giddy.
Angie Geyser, Morgan's mother, was eager to have the girls hanging out at their home. She heard them giggling and running up and down the house and was happy that they were having such a good time.
When talking about Payton, Morgan would later say that, quote unquote, she wanted to give her at least one more morning to enjoy before her death. They had originally planned on killing her that evening. That was their plan A of many plans.
They had a lot of plans. And again, because they talked about this for weeks, they got together and they really were, when we say they were plotting against her, they genuinely were.
They were writing like secret little notes to one another and like sort of speaking in code so that they could talk about their plans around other people and have other people not think twice about what they were talking about.
And Morgan and Anissa really fed off of each other because Payton would say, you know, Morgan started to change when Anissa came into the picture. And one of the things that made me laugh is one of the news articles that talks about Morgan being, you know, evil and this and that. Yeah. And they're like, she would make her in The Sims and burn her entire house down. And I'm like,
okay, so while we retrospectively look at this case, that does seem like a pretty big red flag. But, and don't lie to me out there, plenty of you have put your Sims in swimming pools and removed the ladders. Don't lie to me.
There's people who say that they've done that, and then there's people who are lying.
Exactly. So, like, with context, not really that outrageous.
Right.
It was a little weird that she was making her friend and doing it, I will say.
Yes.
But I digress.
It just made me laugh because I'm just kind of like, who hasn't done that? Like, hello?
I mean, you know what? I think of Animal Crossing and it being like literally the cutest game on the planet Earth. And people are still mean to their quote unquote ugly villagers.
Right?
So like, not the biggest red flag, a pink flag, probably.
Well, yeah, it's salmon.
Oh my God. When Anissa and Morgan originally found the story of Slender Man online, the two became obsessed. They would talk about him constantly while in the presence of Payton. The idea of him terrified her, and she actually hated it when they brought him up.
Stacy, Payton's mom, knew that this troubled her daughter because Payton had talked to her about Slender Man in the past. So together they looked at the creepypasta and had multiple conversations about how he wasn't real and this wasn't something that she needed to be afraid of.
Payton admitted to her that she knew he was just a story, but she made mention that Morgan knew he was real. Eventually, she stopped bringing it up to her mother, and Stacy assumed that the girls had moved on. Little did she know, the girls' obsession was only growing.
After all was said and done, Morgan and Anissa would explain their reasoning for their actions and how they were linked to Slender Man, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Over the course of a few weeks, Morgan and Anissa discussed multiple ways that they could murder Payton. They even stayed up until 2 a.m. talking about it as Payton slept next to them.
And here's the thing. Payton talks about this in an interview. She's like, Morgan would always stay up. But this particular sleepover, Morgan was like, no, let's go to bed. Let's go to bed. Let's go to bed. And then waited for Payton to fall asleep. And that was when they were like saying all of this stuff.
And I think a lot of people will probably agree in the sense that a lot of times when you have a group of 3 girls, usually it's an odd number and it ends up with someone being left out.
Absolutely.
Not all the time, but a lot of the time. 2 of them will always bond a little more for whatever reason. You know, maybe they were the ones that met first or whatever. But I feel like in this case, because they had sort of targeted her and then worked off of each other, so much worse.
In the early hours of May 31st, the girls had breakfast together and played games. Morgan then suggested that the three of them go hang out at the park. This was a big deal because Angie, Morgan's mom, didn't normally allow her to go to the park by herself. But she trusted the girls and felt she had no reason to worry about them playing somewhere in an area that she deemed safe.
They had even had like donuts for breakfast that day.
It was like the most wholesome. Like when you think about it, it
birthday
was a fun sleepover.
Yes. Oh my God. It just escalates so quickly and so wildly. And this poor girl had no idea.
No clue whatsoever.
And same with Angie. Little did Angie know the danger lay right within her own daughter.
Morgan initiated a game of hide and seek, and Payton happily agreed, not knowing that the game was meant to end in her death.
They took Payton to a secluded area where they instructed her to cover herself with sticks and leaves so that she could hide. When she was down, Morgan stabbed her a total of 19 times with a kitchen knife she had brought from home.
And this was a huge kitchen knife. Like the blade was 5 inches.
Yes, I think 5 inches. I read somewhere 13 centimeters. Same thing.
Yeah,
but
huge.
And I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but the wounds she had were not insignificant.
No. Payton was then told to lay there while they went to get help. Her survival was nothing short of a miracle. Doctors would later say that one of the stab wounds had missed a major artery by a single millimeter, and she was very close to dying instantly. That's the width of a hair.
Yes. And they stabbed her all over. Her arms, her torso, and everything. She is incredibly lucky that she survived. And the one thing that she said after the fact too is that they argued. The two of them argued over who would do the stabbing.
There was a point when they were in the house and Payton was outside where they argued. And then there was another point where they were at the park and they kind of got Payton further away and they argued again about who would get to do it. So originally they said Anissa had the knife and she was like, I can't do this. And then Morgan took it and then she was the one who did it.
So they had argued over who was going to do the actual stabbing. And then when Anissa was like, no, I'm not going to do it. You do it. The go word that they had, the command she gave was, Kitty, go ballistic.
It's interesting because this is a very adult crime.
Oh, 100%. I don't even know how as authorities you look at 12-year-old girls and is like, how are we supposed to try you for this?
Right, but there's little bits and pieces of it where their age really shows. And I think that's one of those times where you hear that and you're like, these are children.
Yeah. When they had finished stabbing Payton, apparently they kind of recovered her up with the leaves and they assured her, they were like, oh, lay still because otherwise you'll bleed out faster. We're going to go get help. And apparently Payton had admitted to this afterwards. And she's like, even in that moment, I knew they weren't going to get help.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, again, a miracle she even survived this.
She managed to get herself up with the help of a nearby tree branch and dragged herself to a road where she was discovered by a cyclist named Greg Steinberg. He then called the police.
Payton surviving her wounds long enough to go get help is astonishing considering what she went through. What makes this story even more miraculous is that Greg never took this route. He just happened to decide that day that he wanted to take a different route for a change of scenery. He also did it just at the right time to see her there while she was still alive.
And there's the 911 call with him. And he doesn't realize the severity of it. No one, upon like first look, no one realizes how serious this is.
Yeah.
Because he saw her laying on the ground and he could see that there was blood on her clothes, but he had no clue just how bad it was. When they got the call, the 911 operators were shocked because things like this just didn't happen in Waukesha. While he was on the phone, Greg asked her who hurt her. She then told him the horrible truth. It was Morgan Geyser.
When the message was originally relayed, police were almost in a state of denial. One of them would later say he assumed at first that the story had been heard wrong and that the 12-year-old had fallen off her bike and simply scratched herself.
It's like, no, a 12-year-old wouldn't be stabbed. What are you talking about? By her friends? No.
Exactly.
Police arrived before an ambulance did. They took a closer look at her wounds and saw how serious this really was. Soon after, the ambulance arrived and Payton was taken to the hospital where trauma surgeons worked tirelessly to try to save her life. Right before they took her in for surgery, an investigator confirmed her story with her.
She communicated with them using a whiteboard because at this point she was unable to speak.
The lady who spoke with her would later say that she didn't really expect her to survive and that it was important to know who did this to her before she went under.
And this is probably something that never even crossed Payton's mind at that point. I mean, she's a kid, she's in shock, like she's life or death situation right now. But I think, honestly, if I were in her position, I'd be like, I'm not going into surgery until I write those fucking names down. Because if I end up not making it out of this, at least for my family, you're going to get these bastards.
Absolutely. And I mean, she had a breathing tube at this point. Like she could not speak, but she had that whiteboard and she was able to write it down.
The intense badassery of this little girl.
12 years old. Again,
astounding.
Keep it in mind. 12.
You know what, though? Kids are freaking tough.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think it's for the best that they maybe don't always realize the severity of a situation because I think it allows them to survive it. Payton's mom, Stacy, had been expecting to hear from Payton around 11 a.m. that day. The call never came and she began to worry. Soon after, her worst fears were confirmed when 2 police officers arrived at her front door. They told her that Payton had been stabbed but was alive. She made it just in time to see her daughter before she went under, and she told her that she loved her and that she would be okay.
She talks about this in an interview, Stacy does, where she's watching the nurses count the stab wounds. And they had multiple nurses count so that they didn't miss one,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And the one nurse goes to the other one and she goes, I count 19. And the other nurse says, I count 19 too. And Stacy's like, 19 what? Like what are you talking
19
about?
19 stitches?
Yeah,
19...
she's like, what do you mean 19 stab wounds?
Because you think of, I mean, a kid. She's a kid. I mean, I probably weighed 80 pounds at 12 years old. Your body's not big enough to have 19 stab wounds. Do you know what I mean?
It's hard to imagine.
Oh my God. And then hearing that as, like you say, the mom and being like, sorry, 19 what?
Yeah.
In my 12-year-old daughter.
She just found this out too. Like all of this is happening so fast.
And she doesn't know the full story at this point.
No.
So she's like, what happened? Like how was my daughter stabbed? She was at a sleepover with her best friends.
And she even said at that point, she's like, and are the other girls okay?
Yes.
Where are they?
Because that would be your immediate assumption that they were probably all together playing somewhere or whatever. Little did she frickin' know. The surgery to save Payton's life took 6 hours. When she woke up, her first thought was if they had found Morgan and Anissa.
When investigators arrived at Morgan's home, Angie, her mom, was shocked to see a team dressed in riot gear swarm into her living room. They told her that there had been an incident in the park and that one of the girls was hurt. She was in pure disbelief when they finally told her what happened.
Next, they looked for Anissa and Morgan at Anissa's house. They weren't there either. Anissa's mother looked through her phone and found a series of goodbye notes she had written to her family.
After an extensive search, the girls were found near a furniture store just off of the highway, almost 8 kilometers away from where the stabbing took place. They were on their way to Nicollet National Forest, where they would later say that they believed Slender Man lived. And they had a bag. And they were like, again, this is where we see that childishness. They're like, oh, well, we brought some gummy bears so we could have like some sugar for the trip because they thought they could walk. This was like 300 miles away.
Yeah, it was like an 8-hour drive or something.
Yeah, and they're like, yeah, we're just going to walk there.
And I think as well, when they did find them by that furniture store, they were literally like sitting on the grass median, like kind of deciding what they wanted to do next or like what direction they were going to take next.
Yeah, because they went to Walmart.
Yeah.
And went to the bathroom and washed all the blood off.
Yeah.
And then they were like, all right, let's go.
Delulu. But we'll get into that as well. The search for the 2 missing girls had been all over the news. The case shocked the public, but like everyone else, they had no clue what was in store.
The girls were interrogated separately. From the start, investigators knew that they had a very serious case on their hands. In their wildest dreams, they could have never predicted why something like this would have happened.
And like with so many interrogation tapes, they are wild. At one point, Morgan asks if she's going to be put away to quote unquote rot and die, and also asks them to please not cut off her head. She also sings and dances when investigators are gone, and she doesn't seem to show any remorse.
She's pulling a Jodi Arias.
I was going to say, coincidentally, just dancing around the interrogation room.
Anissa had a hard time holding herself together during the interrogation and cried while she talked about what happened.
Both of the girls seem to have the same story. They wanted to kill Payton to appease Slender Man so that they could earn a spot in his mansion and feared that he would harm their families if they didn't.
They explained that Slender Man had proxies. Anissa would say that Morgan suggested that the two of them become his proxies.
And we talked about the concept of these proxies last week. They're basically Slender Man's puppets. They do his bidding and live with him in his mansion in the woods.
The investigator who talked to Anissa would later say that she went into this interview thinking that they did this because of a fight over a boy or something along those lines. Like, imagine her shock. She goes into it thinking that. And then all of a sudden, they're talking about proxies and Slender Man, who obviously she's never heard of Slender Man before.
You know, to kind of bring it into sort of current days perspective, I mean, I don't spend a whole lot of time around youngins these days. Like, I'm very far removed from like basically anyone 25 and under at this point. So I am out of touch with the youth of today. But can you imagine like two teenagers, not even preteens, getting arrested today and then like telling the lead detective, oh yeah, like skibbity toilet Riz. And the lead detective's like, pardon me?
You did what?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make any sense.
And in the interrogation tapes, the investigator, she's like, so, okay, there's proxies and Slender Man's the boss. So he's up here and they're down there. And they're like, yeah.
Duh.
Like, duh.
Like, it's so laughable because it just doesn't make any sense. And these poor, like, I can imagine like the detectives going home that night and being like, I need to like ask my children some context, but I can't give anything away about this investigation.
And this is, again, Waukesha. Like, this is not a place where crime happens. Like, the cop who first arrived at the scene, he was talking about how like the big event that had happened that week is they had a video rental store. And some kids had like changed one of the signs to say something vulgar. And they were like, they called the police. And that was his like big case of the week. And he was taking pictures to show his wife. And like life was fine until it wasn't.
Oh my God. In the end, both girls were very cooperative during their interrogations and shared everything they knew with very little prompting.
According to Wisconsin state law, children 10 and over can be tried as adults if the crime is deemed serious enough. Morgan was charged with attempted first-degree murder, and Anissa was charged with attempted second-degree homicide due to the fact that she did not stab Payton herself.
Throughout the interrogations and pretrial interviews, Morgan talked about having visual and auditory hallucinations for as long as she could remember. She stated that she had had multiple conversations with not only Slender Man, but with Severus Snape from the Harry Potter novels. I mean, we talked about imaginary friends last week.
We did.
Severus Snape would not be who I would conjure up given the choice.
No, and she was also like, yeah, I see unicorns, I see creatures. Like, it's so bizarre because she's, again, this is not her imagination in her mind. She thinks that she's seeing this stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, you guys will have to let us know your thoughts because some people believe that this is bullshit and that she's just psycho, but not in that way. But she does have a genetic history of things like schizophrenia and stuff.
Yes.
So, you know. Anissa pled guilty, but stated she wasn't responsible for her actions because she was mentally ill. A jury agreed to this, and she was given a 25-year sentence where she would spend at least 3 years in a psychiatric hospital and be under supervision until she was 37 years old.
Morgan accepted a plea deal, therefore she did not appear in front of a jury. She was given a maximum sentence of 40 years to life with at least 3 years confinement. And in addition to that, she was to undergo involuntary treatment in a psychiatric hospital until she is deemed well or turns 53, whichever comes first.
That's a long time to be locked up in when you are 12 years old.
Yep.
The world is going to pass you by.
Yeah, by the time she was sentenced, she was 15. And like, that's a baby.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're not 15 right now, you remember what it was like to be 15.
Yeah.
And if I woke up tomorrow and I was in my 15-year-old body, you just hear me scream halfway across the province. No, thank you.
All three sets of parents gave multiple interviews where they talked about what happened. Both Anissa and Morgan's parents stated that they never saw their daughters being involved in something like this.
They knew the girls were online reading about Slender Man, but had no reason to assume that they thought he was real.
They're like, yeah, he talked about him all the time. They drew pictures of him. They told stories about him, but we thought that they knew he wasn't real.
Yeah, that it's just, like everyone has special interests and, kids latch on to things like, fuck, who hasn't watched Shrek 2 12 times in a day because a little sibling wanted to watch it again and again.
Yeah.
You have interests. Like, I loved freaking bats when I was like obsessed. I knew like all the species of bats and where they live. Like, kids have interests and sometimes they're kind of spooky and that's okay. But like, you assume that they know.
Yeah.
That it's just a spooky imagination stuff.
But the thing is, they would say like Slender Man is real and the parents were like, sure, honey, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what I've never been in that position where my child that I don't have is like, mommy and daddy, there's a monster in the basement. And you're like, yeah, sure there is.
Right? You don't actually think, oh yeah, there's definitely a monster in the basement. Let's go look. Because it's like, this in my mind can't be real. So why would it be?
Exactly. On March 10th, 2019, Anissa, then 19 years old, wrote a letter to the court expressing how sorry she was for what had happened. She said that through years of therapy, she had grown and hated what she did, but no longer hated herself.
She was released in September of that year with multiple stipulations, including restricted internet use. She is not allowed to use any social media and was required to remain on psychiatric medication and counseling until she is 37. She also has to live with her father until her full release.
Morgan, on the other hand, attempted to appeal her case by arguing that she should have been charged as a juvenile. The court declined to hear her appeal. She was denied a request for release in April of 2024.
Payton went on to graduate high school and enroll in college in hopes of someday working in the medical field. She told her story to ABC News, saying that her experience is what inspired her to pursue that particular career.
By all accounts, Payton seems to be doing very well for herself, all things considered, and says that what she went through made her a stronger person. And she's so brave in the sense that she also was like, if I could talk to Morgan and Anissa, I would actually thank them.
Which, wow.
That takes a very special individual to... I don't know if forgive's the right word because I wouldn't go as far as to say that she's forgiven them. But she did say, she's like, my scars are going to fade over time, but this was a lesson that I have learned and she's stronger for it. And that's not always the case, unfortunately.
And I highly recommend watching the ABC News interview. It's really inspiring to hear her talk and hear her talk about kind of what had happened and how she has healed throughout it, because she is a survivor. She is a very inspiring person, and she has gone out of her way to make her life into something good. And even her parents say, like, this kid was meant to do great things.
Well, the wounds and physical damage alone that she went through is incredibly traumatizing. But having that experience where your two best friends betray you like that.
Yeah. How do you trust people again?
How do you ever have another friend ever again? Because let me tell you, I would trust no bitch after that.
No, definitely not.
So she's, the amount of healing and therapy and stuff that you have to go through to trust another human being that way again. Like, holy shit.
And she has fantastic parents. Like, they have really gone out of their way to give her the support that she needs. And they've done a good job with her.
And I will say, you know what? Credit to Morgan and Anissa's parents too. They also lost a lot that day.
Oh, absolutely.
In the sense that their entire lives changed. Their daughters are either under psychiatric evaluation for the years of their lives. They're both, Morgan's obviously still in an institution, but Anissa is going to be under supervision until she's damn near 40 years old. It ruined their lives as well. And thankfully, the silver lining, the sun behind the clouds here is that Payton survived and is continuing to be a little badass. And I love that for her.
And it's interesting that you say that because, like, I don't know how to word this without it sounding terrible, but I feel like Anissa and Morgan's parents really lost the most here. Payton's parents, of course, what they went through was traumatic.
Horrible.
What Payton went through was traumatic, but like Anissa and Morgan's parents, their lives were essentially ruined because of this.
And in, I mean, a small town.
Yep.
As well.
Yep.
Not good. Not good.
And their interviews are interesting to watch too, because all 3 sets of parents have done a lot of interviews.
And I'm glad in a way that, I mean, to me, the more information we can get about this, the better, because I think to understand what can happen to a young mind when it is influenced like that. I mean, I'm sure there were many, many discussions about, you know, sort of internet safety with your kids and all that sort of stuff too. Pretty crazy that a little internet meme ended up in a situation like this.
It's one of those scenarios where if a child was of very sound mind and they heard of Slender Man, like Payton did, they would be like, okay, yeah, no, that's fake. It's scary, but like, I get it. It's not real. But this was the worst combination of what most would argue is mental health and then this scary story, and just those 2 things together turned into just something terrible.
I will say as well, before we wrap up, the creator of Slender Man, Eric Knudsen, however you pronounce it, Knudsen, he did come out and say, you know what, I'm so sorry that this happened. And he's like, my hearts go out to the families. You know, you can look up his sort of full statement on it, but he was like, this is never what we wanted. It is simply art.
He's like, I just wanted a Photoshop battle. That was all.
And to be fair, I don't think anyone personally blamed him.
No,
I'm sure
of course not.
There might have been a few people that might have pointed some vitriol his way, because like with anything, a case like this that is so shocking and gruesome and against children on children violence, you have people jumping to like the satanic panic of it all. Do you know what I mean? So like people really could have brought out their torches and pitchforks for poor Eric, but it didn't really seem like that was the case, thankfully.
No, and I mean, Slender Man has continued to be a thing. I feel like he has fizzled out a little bit in the last few years, but like we said
he
last
week,
has
a revival once in a while.
He does. You know, where there was the game in 2015, there was the horrific movie a few years after that, and now there's us talking about him in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, his urban mythage has survived this long, I will say.
But I will say, I was curious to see if people are still writing fan fiction about him. They are.
I believe it 100%. Because if you can think of it, there's fan fiction.
Of course. And it's still happening.
And if you can think of it, there's raunchy fan fiction.
Of course.
Oh, that is finally the story of the Slender Man stabbing and the survival of Payton Leutner.
With that being said, don't forget to follow us on twitch.tv/thegrimcurriculum. We are on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Cool. Follow us on all the things. We love it.
Yeah, I'm sure if you Google us, we'll come right up there.
Yeah, we will.
Just another heads up that we are planning a 6th Grim Encounters episode, and we want to hear from you guys. So send us your spooky or creepy stories. Have you had a true crime encounter of your own? Do you have a ghost story to share with us? A UFO encounter?
Have you seen Slender Man?
And as always, have you just been creepy?
Yeah, I want to know those stories the most, honestly. If you have a story you want shared on the show, email us at thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com with the subject Grim Encounters 6.
We are also starting another big series next week, and the early episode reveal will be up on Patreon, so keep your eyeballs peeled for that.
And this is not a story that we meant to cover anytime soon. It kind of just happened. We discussed it actually just earlier today, and it's a doozy. It is very interesting.
Yeah, and if you aren't familiar, you've definitely heard recently.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking of Patreon, make sure you check us out there. Like we said, there's a free tier. You can get a week-long trial for the paid stuff, so you get to watch videos of all of the episodes, which is super fun. We also have a Discord. And with that being said, we want to thank all of our Grim VIPs. We appreciate you. We love you. Thank you to Atlantean Jedi, Bob, Brian, Hillary, Judy, Kevinus Musicus, Nova, Lisa, Steven Centauri, and Mayhem Mudkip.
Man, some of you guys have been around so long that I've almost got it like memorized off the top of my head.
Right? I love it.
Yeah.
Like the support has been amazing. And there's a lot of good stuff on the Patreon, folks. Like go check it out. You don't even have to pay to get some of the good stuff. And yeah.
No, and usually the episodes are up a few hours early on Patreon too, because I just upload them as soon as I'm done editing. Whereas on YouTube and Spotify and all the other podcast platforms, they air on Saturdays at 12 p.m. MST, or Extra Credit is every second Wednesday at 12 p.m. MST.
Yes, and we do a live premiere on YouTube, so hang out with us and discuss the case in real time. We love hearing your thoughts.
Absolutely. Well, shall we wrap her up?
Yes. Thank you all so much for listening. This has been
The Grim Curriculum.
I learned this today, and I thought you might appreciate it.
Oh.
It is illegal to hold salmon under quote-unquote suspicious circumstances in England and Wales. This law was passed in 1986 as part of the Salmon Act, which was put in place to stop illegal salmon fishing in the UK.
I shudder to think what suspicious circumstances with a salmon include, but I kind of don't want to know.
Same. Bye.